Today on Cone's Garage, our goal is to work through the items on this list that are preventing us from starting up the Mark II Supra. With such great hits like driveshaft installing, header installing, fluiding, and more. We'll get right to work, putting the driveshaft back in place, which unfortunately is not nearly as hilarious looking as removing it was. Major props to past me for labeling all this stuff so it was easy to reinstall. Now we're ready to put fluid into the transmission. We can loosen up this fill hole, then lower the car back down and fill it through the transmission. And whenever the fluid drips out of the fill hole, we know it's 100%. And so it was. Filling the gear lube through the transmission shifter is much easier than trying to pump it through the fill hole. Looking at this shot makes me wish I had cleaned the transmission better, but as the fluid drains out of here, I remember by the next time I look at this transmission, it would have been this dirty again, so it doesn't really matter. But with that done, we can cap it off and move on to the next part of the list, getting the ECU harness back through the firewall. This is one of those cases where, as the car is built like an onion, we have removed a layer of onion that wasn't yet exposed. So getting the harness back through the firewall, getting it around the heater core, getting around the AC stuff, it's very frustrating and very challenging, and it makes you think, what was an engineer thinking? In reality, they weren't thinking of this because this is not the proper procedure. It's doable and certainly saves a lot of time, but it's a pain right in the ass trying to get that wiring through there. After a good bit of griping, I was able to finally get the wires through and ready to be connected. The subject of being mad at engineers, though, let's not waste that opportunity to really hate on somebody for this fuel filter design, which is bolted to the engine block and has banjo fittings top and bottom in this space. Let's take out our frustrations by cutting some stuff. Actually, it's like cutting some stuff. It's the O2 sensor extension on the pacesetter header getting modified to be not extended and just bolted right to one of the primaries. Rather than mess around with the old hardware, I went ahead and put all new studs in the head for the header. This header ended up being a real pain in the butt for us. The O2 sensor relocation wasn't too bad. That seems to have worked pretty well. The O2 sensor is now the same distance from the head as it was factory, even if it is on a single primary, so it should have an accurate reading at least. The flange where the header bolts to the head needed a bunch of grinding and modification to get to fit there, so I would send a nasty message to Pacesetter, but they made this header 20 years ago, so they don't care. Today's accomplishment, kind of hard to see, but the new alternator has been mounted. I had the pulley machined, so that alternator is changed from this pulley, which only has 5 ribs, to the 7-rib pulley that came with the car. So again, this is a 7M alternator that has been rebuilt and is actually high output, so it should have plenty of electrical power for the car. No more lacking in the charge to, say, raise the headlights and that kind of stuff. Should be a nice upgrade. There were some roadblocks that I'll have to get a flashlight to show. So right there, that very oily part, that's the tensioner for the alternator. And you saw we had to grind down the bracket a little bit because this alternator has a different mounting point. It's just slightly further to the right, maybe an inch further to the right, which means that obviously the tensioner is moved almost all the way to the right in order for the belt to fit, but it did fit. The easiest way to do it would have been to not use that tensioner bracket and just put the bolt straight through. Right there, you see the nut. That's what, actually helps you tighten it down. Bypassing that would have been easier, but it would have made future serviceability a nightmare. And with a project like this, that's something that I'm trying to keep very mindful of as we intend to use this car for, long cruises or, even like cross-country kind of stuff would be cool. And having things that are set up for future nightmares, like not being able to tension the alternator or just having it very difficult to remove, is not a good idea. Okay, so sometimes things have to get a little roadkill, even if you're not doing things on the side of the road. This is a very simple problem that doesn't have a very defined solution, so I'm kind of just putting some things together. The radiator. We're also upgrading to a Mark III Supra radiator. It is an aluminum 2-row unit that is much beefier and much nicer than the old one. The problem is the pegs, the legs for it, are too far inside to hit where the mounts should be. So instead, on the outside of the radiator, there's two kind of redundant, they're almost like splash shields that run like a V up against the radiator bracket. It would just rest on those, aluminum on metal, not great. So I've taken these previous radiator mounts, lopped them in half, and what I'm going to do is run this carriage bolt with a nut underneath of it and a washer underneath of it down through that bracket, and this head will sit out. Should hold this in place. It's a nice snug fit in there, but it should hold down far enough that the radiator isn't making contact with the head of the bolt. So radiator pushing down on it will keep it in place this way, and the bolt will just keep it from sliding out front to back, left to right. That's the plan in theory. Let's see if it works. And sometimes, just sometimes, things actually work out. Ta-da! These are the brackets for the old radiator, but luckily the new style radiator also has that rounded top. The holes are in different places though, and the whole radiator is actually shifted to the left right now. I may need to shift it back to the right a little bit. I gotta get the hoses in place and see if they need adjusting before I make holes for these guys. I want to make sure everything is lining up good. So far so good. Just little pieces of rubber that go in between those two. And the level's good too. Like, it doesn't seem like the radiator's too high. So far so good. So I've gotten the lower radiator hose on, the top one next, and this is why I always keep around the old parts until absolutely necessary to throw them away, which is usually never for me. But this, old, new, looks about the same. However, as you can see, not the same length. So if I hadn't have kept this one, I would have been fighting this one for the next 3 hours, wondering why it doesn't fit, versus now I can see, it's longer. I can go ahead and just make this shorter off the bat and feel comfortable doing that. The other factor is this radiator is thicker overall, so that maybe even further back wanting to pinch this, and that's what we don't want. We don't want these corners to pinch. Radiator mounted. Fan shroud actually fits so far. Gotta mount the fans on there though to make sure. Didn't come with any hardware to attach to the radiator though. So yeah, no hardware with this, but to be honest, it's a bridge I can cross on another day, especially since it's 42 degrees in here. I don't think we need the fans at the moment. Just another trip to the hardware store here. I'll show it to you. Pretty nice little setup. It's got these legs that go off to the holes in the shroud. So it looks like we just need a couple of, flat-headed screws for those so that they don't interfere with anything. And then obviously a fan controller as well. Another day. This wasn't even on the list. I lied. Before I get too carried away with reassembling the engine, I'm pretty much ready at this point to get everything back on But before I do that, I'm going to start putting fluids in, make sure we don't have any leaks in any of the systems that are easier to get to before I go and put the intake and the rest of the wiring, the battery and stuff back in. So I guess that's what we're doing now. We're going to put some oil in it, put some power steering fluid in it, and see where it leaks from. Just in case. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Will any of the leaks actually fall into the pan? Very unlikely. Let's start off with the one most likely to leak. Power steering. Two things. That's going to take a little time to settle through the system. Also, it needs to be burped, which means turning the wheel all the way left, all the way right, multiple times to get the fluid to circulate through the system with the cap open to burp it. But I'm just going to leave it like it is now. The fluid's going to go through the return side of the system right now, and we'll see if it leaks. It just might, under the pressure of burping it, it might leak more. But I think if we let it sit for a while now, we should be able to see. See that oil filter right there? Why didn't you tell me to remove that oil filter before I put that header on? Dumb. And it's on there with a vigor, especially since it's like that temperature. Are you ready for a super exciting montage of me putting fluids in the car? Probably not. But a gallon of distilled water, a gallon of coolant, and then a little bit more distilled water should give us a nice antifreeze, much needed antifreeze combination. So here what I'm doing is topping up the funnel and putting water pressure down on the radiator and then squeezing the radiator hoses to try and burp out the air pockets that form in them. I admit it, I spent the $4 to get an oil filter socket because I was too wimpy to remove the old one. Hey, it worked. It was a lot easier. I didn't even curse at it, in fact. The thing I'm pointing out here is that the gasket was extremely dry. The whole oil filter was very dry. Obviously, this engine hasn't been run in many months, and I'm sure it was old before that, too. So, yeah, it was pretty on there. But don't you worry, I put a nice layer of lube on the new one. Also, I'm really sad Purolator's not making these filters anymore. I really like the textured finish. It makes them so much easier to remove. And now it's oil time. Still sticking with the Castrol high mileage because it's worked out very well for this car. And I find pouring these 5-quart jugs sideways like this to be the easier way to do it. Hey, remember this? That's the list. Seems like it's been a while since we've even really looked at the list. But trust me, it's always on my mind. So what we're doing now is the engine install, which says after windshield. Basically what I meant by that was after the windshield repair. That repair is done. So, what have I done for the engine install? Well, we've done the drive shaft. I've not done the shifter. I've not done the speedo cable. I've done the exhaust. Enough to make it run. ECU wiring is through, but I need to put the actual ECU back in. Bumper. Now, I put that under engine install, but really that's not really necessary, obviously, to make the engine run. But, there's a development there. Remember that really, really, really rusty piece that came off the front? We have another one. We have another one off of the parts car. And it's in okay shape. It needed some welding work done to it, and somebody already did some to it in the past. It's all a very hidden element. I've gone through and coated all the possible rust spots with the POR 15 stuff, which I'm liking. It's actually worked out quite nicely for me. It lays nice and flat, and yeah, it seems to really bond very well, and hopefully keeps this stuff protected in the future. Back to the list. Okay, so, cooling system revamp. We have done the radiator, we've not done the electric fan. Header, done. I've modded the O2 sensor, I've not done this. The brakes haven't started. Motor and trans mounts are done. Trans fluid is filled. We've used that. We've used that. Haven't used the slave cylinder. Actually, I'm going to keep that as a spare part because the original was in good shape. The moonroof, I have the other moonroof sandblasted. I need to finish the repairs on that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I guess, is install the shifter. The speedo cable, I'm not sure, because I found that it was easier to do the one in the dash without it hooked into the trans than it was the other way around. I don't know if I feel like putting on a dash today, but I do want to hear this thing run today. So maybe backwards on that. But as of right now, we're looking pretty good. The coolant is in, the oil is in, the power steering fluid is in. So far, knock on wood, 0 leaks. I'm sure that will end as soon as it's running, but it's a good start. Boy, past me sure is a real nice fella. Labeled these unique shifter bolts in a baggie so that I could find them in the future. Gosh, always thinking ahead he is. Remember how I said I didn't want to install the dashboard today? Well, there's pretty much no way around it. If you want to hook up the transmission cable, you need to have the gauge cluster in first. And if you want the gauge cluster in, you need the dashboard in. I've shown you a very small clip here of me pushing the dashboard in place. That's not what happened. This is a very much so finish the rest of the owl situation, where that dashboard took me a good 3 or 4 hours of finagling to get the AC ducting and all of the stuff fit back together. Look, just explaining how I got the dash in took too long. We're already moving on to putting the air intake back on there. This is the factory air intake. Somewhere in the future, we may look at revising this, making a modern unit, because some of the rubber and plastics in this is getting a little bit brittle. Speedo cable hooked up. It's in there somewhere, trust me. Dashboard and gauge cluster installed-ish. ECU. Yeah, we'll go ahead and just say that's installed. Battery in, intake on. I think this thing's about ready to be fired up, but I gotta wait for slag. It would be a crime to start it without him here. So convenient. Purrs like a kitten.
Never tightened that on there.
Is that what was rattling?
Yeah.
It's like, I expected it to be rattly. I didn't expect it to be that rattly.
That sounded like the,
It sounded like it was a
like the pump.
It's pretty foamy. That's probably what it is.
Yeah. It's a stench.
God, it's a stench.
A piece of
Pacer.
the can? Yeah.
It's got two. I go ahead and fill it. I don't want to bring all that out. Good job, Mr. Supra. Well, there you go. It runs. The few little things to take care of. One of the heater core hoses ended up having a little leak. I can fix that. No problem. It's always just a very, very good thing to hear a car run. It makes the whole project just seem much more achievable. Like, nothing from here can stop us from getting this thing back to the road. And that is what we will work on from here. Thank you, everybody, for your support in watching this series. And we'll see you next time, or maybe we get this thing back on the road.